There is a certain type of person who moves through the world with an unusual quietness. Not the quietness of introversion, or the quietness of a thoughtful mind, but a quieter, heavier stillness, a kind of emotional restraint that almost feels practiced. They smile in the right moments, they offer support to the people they care about, and they rarely burden others with their struggles. On the surface, nothing about them seems troubled. They function, they work, they check the boxes of life as if nothing inside them is pulling in a different direction. But if you watch closely, you'll notice something barely perceptible, a pause that lasts just a second too long, an apology that appears where an apology wasn't needed, the way they shrink a little when the attention shifts to them. These are the small signatures of someone who carries a quiet shame, one so deeply woven into their identity that it no longer feels like an emotion, it feels like part of who they are. Quiet shame is not loud enough to break a person. Instead, it bends them. It reshapes how they walk into rooms, how they interpret neutral expressions, how they predict other people's reactions long before speaking. It doesn't destroy their life dramatically, it limits it subtly. It creates the feeling that they must always be careful, considerate, and controlled, because somewhere inside, they believe there is something about them that must be managed or hidden. Not because they did something unforgivable recently, but because a part of them has learned to see itself as flawed. And so they move with caution, as if the world might one day confirm something they feared for years. The question is, why do some people carry this silent form of shame for so long, without letting anyone see it? And why does it persist even when their lives look successful, stable, and functional? To understand that, we need to look at how quiet shame forms. It usually doesn't come from a single moment. It grows slowly, like a whisper that repeats itself until it becomes the truth. Many people learn shame young, sometimes through experiences that seemed small to others but felt enormous to them. A parent's harsh remark, a teacher's disapproval, a moment of public embarrassment, a family atmosphere where affection was conditional, or even the subtle but consistent message that their feelings were too much, their needs were inconvenient, or their presence was a burden. For a child, these moments create a blueprint. They learn that expressing themselves is risky. They learn that vulnerability leads to discomfort. They learn that to be accepted, they must adjust, shrink, or hide. Over time, the shame becomes a quiet companion. And because it rarely gets acknowledged, it transforms into patterns of behavior that look normal on the surface. These individuals become extremely good at suppression, pushing down uncomfortable emotions before they even reach awareness. It happens automatically. They avoid situations that might bring their shame to the surface, not out of fear of others, but out of fear of confronting themselves. And so the shame stays locked away, untouched, but always present, influencing choices without announcing itself. They also develop compensatory behaviors, small, unconscious attempts to balance the weight they carry. They become perfectionistic, overly polite, overly helpful, or overly self-restrained. They strive to be a version of themselves that might counteract the flaws they believe they have. This isn't manipulation, and it isn't an attempt to deceive others. It's protection. They construct a version of themselves that feels acceptable, and they hope that if they can maintain it, the deeper part of them, the part they are ashamed of, will stay hidden, even from their own awareness. You can see these patterns in all kinds of relationships. In couples, you may notice one partner who avoids conflict, apologizes first, and takes responsibility for things they didn't cause. Not because they are weak, but because conflict threatens to expose something they have spent a lifetime trying not to feel. Among friends, you may see the person who is always reliable but never truly open. They listen, they support, they give, but when it comes time to share something vulnerable, they withdraw into themselves with a practiced smile that says, "It's fine, really." For isolated individuals, quiet shame becomes a kind of internal echo chamber. Without anyone to interrupt their thoughts, the shame becomes more convincing. And in adult children navigating relationships with parents, the shame can resurface effortlessly, as if time never passed. The body remembers what the mind tried to forget. Quiet shame has a strange way of shaping a person's life, not through catastrophic events but through small, repeated compromises. They begin to choose relationships where they feel needed rather than appreciated. They stay silent when they should speak. They say yes when every part of them wants to say no. They downplay their accomplishments, dismiss compliments, and explain away their successes as luck. They laugh off the things that hurt them most. And when they make a mistake, they don't simply feel guilty, they feel confirmed. Their inner narrative whispers, "This is why you must hide. This is why you must be careful. This is why you must not take up too much space." The tragic part is that the shame feels so familiar, so ingrained, that many people don't even identify it as shame. They think it's humility, or caution, or personality. They believe they're simply not that confident, or bad at talking about themselves, or better in the background. But beneath these explanations is a persistent belief that there is something inherently wrong with them. And because the shame is quiet, they never challenge it. Instead, they adapt their entire emotional world around it. The deeper layer of this phenomenon is rooted in unmet psychological needs. Many of the people who carry quiet shame were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that their worth was conditional, based on behavior, achievement, obedience, or emotional performance. The child who learned that love must be earned becomes the adult who believes acceptance is fragile. The child who learned that mistakes lead to humiliation becomes the adult who fears visibility. And the child who learned that vulnerability is dangerous becomes the adult who hides behind competence, kindness, or silence. It's not that they want to hide. It's that hiding has always felt safer. The aha moment often comes when these individuals finally realize that their shame is not about who they are, it's about what they learned. Shame that is taught in childhood masquerades as identity in adulthood. But it is not identity. It is conditioning. And the moment someone sees that conditioning clearly, the entire story begins to shift. Quiet shame stays quiet because it is never questioned. It survives through avoidance. It lives in the dark. And the reason it carries so much power is that it goes unnamed for so long. But once a person begins to examine the patterns, the apologies, the minimizing, the self-erasure, the emotional caution, they begin to recognize that these behaviors were not choices. They were survival strategies. And strategies can be unlearned. This is where real psychological transformation begins. Not through advice, not through motivation, but through recognition. When someone finally understands that their quiet shame is not proof of inadequacy, but proof of adaptation, they begin to loosen their grip on the old narratives. They begin to notice when their body tenses in anticipation of judgment. They begin to observe the moment they instinctively shrink themselves. They begin to question the belief that they must constantly make up for something. And with that awareness comes a slow, steady unraveling of the shame's influence. But this process is anything but dramatic. It happens in small internal shifts, a moment of honesty with a partner, a moment of self-compassion during a mistake, a moment of allowing themselves to take up space without apologizing. These are quiet acts, but they erode the foundation of quiet shame piece by piece. The transformation isn't about becoming fearless or loud or assertive. It's about recognizing that their odd behaviors, the hesitation, the carefulness, the self-doubt, were never signs of weakness. They were signs of protection. Their mind was making them smaller to keep them safe. And once a person understands that, they gain the ability to choose a different way of being. Quiet shame does not dissolve easily, but it does soften when exposed to clarity. The moment a person can say, even privately, "This feeling doesn't belong to me," the shame loses a part of its grip. And as they continue to identify its patterns, the shame shifts from something that controls them to something they witness. The truth is, quiet shame does not fade on its own. It stays buried as long as a person stays silent. But shame is a strange emotion. It thrives on secrecy and collapses in the presence of honesty. Even small honesty. Even a whisper of honesty. And that is why the ending of this journey is simple and powerful. Quiet shame doesn't fade on its own. But the moment you speak it aloud, it loses its power to run your life.